Hello, everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and the news today coming out of Panorama and the BBC from the UK is that let me see how they point this out. Portuguese police apologize to Madeleine McCann's parents. Yes, indeed, they've apologized to the family of Madeleine McCann for the handling of the unsolved case more than 16 years after the 3-year-old's mystery disappearance in 2007. Earlier this year, which I think is interesting when they say earlier this year, if you're a news agency, earlier this year could mean January of 2023, or it could mean last month. Which one is it? And why is this information coming out now? Or this story? Why is the media putting this into the public view at this point in time? I'll get to that. But earlier this year, a delegation of police officers. Okay, I don't know who those police officers were. I do know they're Portuguese police officers who are theoretically now in charge of the case. But we don't know exactly who they are because it's just a delegation of police officers traveled from Lisbon to London to apologize for that. It's so pitiful. It is just so pitiful. They didn't apologize to the McCanns. They caved. They caved to the UK and to Germany. Why? Why at this point in time did they cave and travel to give this ridiculous apology? So sorry, we didn't handle the case properly. Well, first of all, I'll let you know, these aren't the original detectives. Certainly isn't Detective Gonzalo Amaral, who wrote the book about the case, right? The Truth of the Lie, and the more recent one. It's not that group. It's a very, very later group, which is now 16 years later. And let me tell you, sometimes what happens is when you have a changing of the guard, the new guard, first of all, doesn't have to really take responsibility for what happened way back then. But so they can easily apologize for the poor handling by the original detectives. They can smear them because it's not going to affect them today. And there is now probably a change of the guard, political guard, which is what I think this is all about, politics, which is why then you have this delegation go to the UK to go, gee, really sorry that those people way back then, those crappy detectives screwed everything up. We think you're totally innocent. We feel really sorry about everything we ever said about you. And we're on board with the UK and Germany because we know it's Christian Brueckner. They don't quite say that, but that's what they're aiming at. Now, let me read a little bit more. So they apologized for the handling of the investigation, according to BBC Panorama. Yeah, well, Panorama's always been up the McCann's butts, so, hey, you know. To put it politely, or not so politely. All right, in 2007, she disappeared. Madeleine disappeared from her family's holiday apartment in Praia de Luz in Portugal in the Algarve, triggering a huge missing persons investigation. During the questioning, Gerry and Kate McCann were named as formal suspects or arguidos. And over, it's said by certain people that they've been cleared. They have never been cleared. Although the new delegation, maybe that's their whole thing now. If they're apologizing, you would think that means clearing. Up until now, they haven't been cleared. The case was mostly shelved, but they weren't cleared as arguidos or possible suspects or persons of interest in what happened to Madeleine McCann. So are they clearing them now officially? We haven't heard the word because it's Panorama, who cannot be believed. All right. So what's going on? All right. What is going on? First of all, let me address what are they apologizing for? What could they possibly be apologizing for all these years later? Okay, I'm going to read you a couple things. One I wrote after about 10 years down the line. I had a blog and the Daily Profile, and I've written many things about Madeleine McCann on the Daily Profiler blog. My book is also below. You can read my book that the McCanns got pulled off of Amazon with a threat of a libel lawsuit. But you can still access my book, Disappearance of the I forgot the name of it, Profile of the Disappearance of Madeleine McCann. And you can find that on Smashwords and Kobo and Apple and Barnes & Noble, just every place but Amazon, because those two scared Amazon, and they removed it. So you can find that. The link is below. And also my blogs on the Daily Profile. I think wrote about 100 blogs on this case. And that's rare for me because I don't usually invest that much time and energy on a case. But this one really bothered me because how outrageous it was, the politics that were involved in this. And I don't know what the politics are. So a lot of people think they know, right? They've listened to certain other people. They have all kinds of theories. Some of them are major conspiracy theories. I don't know why they got the treatment they did. And I don't think it has to do with some big pedophilia ring or any kind of crap like that. I just think it was probably most likely just one country not wanting to be embarrassed by another country. I think it's sometimes that simple, and having some kind of power between a power play between countries. I think it's more likely that than anything else. But let me read you a couple things I wrote. This is after 10 years. And I think it still applies, so I'd like to read it to you. I said this: as a profiler, the most important investigative technique is to focus on the actual evidence. All right, which is interesting because the whole thing with Christian Brueckner and the supposed investigation into him being connected with the disappearance of Madeleine McCann has really come up with zero evidence. What they're doing is not looking at the evidence and then going out to who it could be, but mostly looking at who it could be and trying to connect some evidence to that person. And they failed dismally with Christian Brueckner, creepo that he is. They've got nothing as far as I can see. But so you have to focus on the actual evidence and not create theories that have no origination in the facts. Scotland Yard has spent 6 years. So this was at the 10-year mark. Scotland Yard spent 6 years carrying out a remit that required them to view this case as a stranger abduction, which clearly has tied their hands and forced them to ignore any and all evidence that supports Kate and Gerry McCann. And this was the biggest outrage ever. And when I saw this remit, I knew it was political, hands down, no question about it. Why is that? All right. Anytime an agency is brought in, or an individual like myself is brought in to look at a case, you cannot come in with a preconceived idea of what happened, nor can you just say, I'm not going to look at this. If I had been brought in on this case, I would have looked at the McCanns, but I also would have looked at the possibility of an abductor, a kidnapper. I would have looked at that because until the evidence shows me what the evidence shows me, I cannot say absolutely one is true and the other is not. But Scotland Yard was told not to look at the McCanns, to enter into this. It was considered, it wasn't considered an investigation at the time. It was more of a, I'm not even sure what they actually called it at the time. It was some kind of research mission, essentially. They weren't supposed to be investigating, but they were going to look at things. But they weren't going to look at these two things. They were off limits. You could only look at an abduction. So they had to ignore every single piece of evidence that might support that the McCanns were involved in what happened to their daughter, outside of the neglect issue, which, in case you don't know, is where you leave 3 little children under the age of 4 alone in a vacation flat and go off drinking, where you cannot see, hear, or get back to your children if they're crying, screaming, or being kidnapped, or falling off the back of sofas and ending up with positional asphyxiation and dying. But, you're not allowed to look at that. You should be able to look at that, all right? You should be able to. So Scotland Yard came in with this remit that they couldn't look at these two or anything. There was evidence that might support that, which is ridiculous because the first thing they should have been able to do, you come in, you're going to review, I guess it was called a review. You kind of come in and you're going to review all the evidence. What they could have done was review the evidence and find that they could be excluded, because one of the things you want to do is, if there's no reason to include people, you want to get them out of your way so you can move on. There's no reason why they could not have spoken with the McCanns, interviewed the McCanns, looked at all the evidence, and talked to the Tapas 7 along with the McCanns, which is altogether Tapas 9, the friends that they were drinking with, who were also leaving their children unattended, that whole group, they should have been talking to them. If these people were innocent, 100% innocent, Scotland Yard should have had total access to them. And theoretically, they're more on their side than anybody else. And yet they never interviewed anybody because they were told not to by somebody. Who's that somebody? Well, I'm going to say somebody in some political level, which I do not know. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to come up with ideas on that. I just do not know. I just think it's a political power game between countries. I really don't think that these two had such an incredible, like some blackmail or something on somebody, a high up. I don't buy that stuff. So I'm not going to go there. I just know that Scotland Yard got a remit not to look at them. And that is not the way you do a review or an investigation. I've worked with police departments, and sometimes I've even walked in and they've said, Pat, this is, I don't want to hear about it. I want to look at the evidence. I don't want to know even what you think you know. I want to look at the evidence. And I'll look at the crime scene photos. I'll look at the autopsies, the autopsy photos. I'll look at the autopsy report. I'll look at everything that you've got that's just physical evidence. Then I'll go to the police reports. Then I'll move out to the interviews. I don't want to hear your opinion, because what's the point of bringing me in so that I can just, check mark? Okay, your opinion seems reasonable. See you later. No. The point of me coming in was to give a fresh look. So when Scotland Yard came in, they didn't give this a fresh look. They were already told what to look at, which was abduction and abduction only. All right. So they had their hands tied. Rather than explore the findings of the blood and cadaver dogs, because we had the two dogs that went into the McCann's apartment, and they hit behind the sofa, and they hit a number of places, and they also hit at the hire car that they had. And these were really good dogs. Now, you cannot use the testimony of dogs in a court because they can't testify. Okay? And people don't understand this kind of situation. Generally speaking, the way you can absolutely prove the dogs are right is if they actually find a body. So if they go someplace and they find a body, then you can say, well, 100% they're correct. But if the dogs hit on blood or cadaver evidence through smell, you can't really prove it, which is why it doesn't go into a court of law. But it doesn't mean it's not very interesting, and that the dogs hit there and hit at the hire car as well when there were other cars available. Now, some will say, oh, well, the person who was handling the dogs just shoved them behind the sofa and shoved them to that car. We're going to hear that. But Scotland Yard should have looked at that evidence, and they did not. Rather than explore the findings of the blood and cadaver dogs who hit on the McCann's vacation apartment and car, rather than examining the conflicting and changing statements of the McCanns and their friends, and they did change a lot. One of the things that always bugged me was Jerry originally said he locked up the vacation flat. And later on, they said, oh no, they left the sliding door open so they could go in and check. That story changed. Why? Because you either do one or the other. But they weren't interested in actually having that discussion with him. Let's see. They did not question why the McCanns showed little interest in the sighting of the Smith family, who saw a man carrying off a small blonde child toward the beach on the evening that Madeleine went missing, which I think is the number one reason. That is, I'm going to link also below the 5 key reasons I believe the McCanns are more likely guilty than not. The Smith sighting, where as a family who saw a man walking toward the beach with a child limp in his arms, about the time that somebody would have been taking Madeleine McCann away. That could have been an abductor. However, these two were not even interested in the Smith sighting. They ignored the Smith sighting as much as possible. And I waited for Kate to write her book, because even in her book, she wasn't impressed with the Smith sighting. When you lose a child, when your child is missing, you will go after every sighting possible. But they were not interested in the Smith sighting, which was one of the most reasonable sightings of somebody taking a child toward the beach, even at a time where theoretically Jerry might even have an alibi, although he really didn't. They only liked Jane Tanner's sighting because Jane Tanner's sighting was exactly when he was talking to his friend Jez. So therefore, because Jane Tanner, their friend, said that she was walking up the street and she saw Gerry talking to Jez, having a chit chat. And at the exact time she saw the two men talking, she saw this man walking by carrying a child. Now, interesting enough, Gerry and Jez never saw Jane Tanner, even though it's a tiny little street. And I've been on that tiny little street. Somehow she managed to get by Gerry and Jez without being seen. And they never saw the man that was supposedly carrying off the child either. So isn't that likely to be a big fat lie? So they were interested in Jane Tanner's sighting because it gave him an alibi, but they weren't interested in the Smith sighting because he didn't have such a good alibi at that time. But even if he was totally innocent, why wouldn't they be all over the Smith sighting? Even if the guy even looked like Gerry. Some people have, somebody looks like them. They say, my God, Gerry was at the restaurant and some guy looks like Gerry was carrying a child away. We want to find our child. We'll do anything to find our child. Not these two. They were like, okay, we're not interested. All right. But Scotland Yard wasn't interested either, were they? All right. So Scotland Yard instead of looking at the evidence, they pursued wild theories of child sex trafficking gangs, burglaries gone wrong, and also some woman who was wearing a purple coat who supposedly kidnapped Madeleine because she wanted a child. All right. That's what was going on with Scotland Yard. They weren't interested in actually properly investigating or reviewing the case. And this went on for years and years and years. All right. Why? So now we have a situation where 16 years later, we've got this German prosecutor who keeps claiming over and over again that Christian Brueckner is the guy, but years go by and he can't come up with a shred of actual proof, just some ludicrous crap. And he's always had, the Germans have had the UK on board because, remember, it's an abduction. These two could have nothing to do with it. That's what the remit says. So the UK has jumped on board with Germany, but apparently Portugal was a little slow coming around, But let me read you what I wrote here at the 10-year point. 10 years of lies. Lies of the parents. They lied. Their stories changed. And Kate wouldn't even answer the questions they wanted to interview her, and she refused to interview. Lies of their friends. Their friends' stories changed. And they weren't very helpful either. Lies of the politicians. Lies of the police. And I don't mean the Portuguese police. I mean other police. Lies of the media. Well, they're like the worst. The media, like once they decided they were going to get sued if they talked about the McCanns, they jumped ship, essentially, jumped on the McCann ship. And everything from that moment on was the McCanns are innocent, the McCanns are innocent, the McCanns are innocent, because they knew where their money was going to be made with all the documentaries supporting them. And they would not have anybody on, like myself, to talk about these two unless they had a way to trash me while they were doing it, because they were now on the McCann side, 100%, no questions anymore. All right, so lies of the media. Behind the lies are the agendas. Recognize these and you will find the truth. How do you recognize the agendas? Ignore the words and pay attention to behavior. All right. The behavior of the parents always showed they were more concerned about their own welfare than Madeleine's. They didn't really search for her. They were more concerned that they were being looked at. They refused to discuss things. Their behavior has always been bizarre. I've worked with a lot of parents of missing and murdered children. And people do have their own personalities. And I can't say I'm in love with either one of this couple's personalities, especially his. But there's definitely still a way, in spite of their personalities, that there is a kind of a way that parents of missing and murdered children act. In other words, they will do literally anything to find that child or to find their child's murderer. These two, not so much. They're more interested in protecting themselves, which is exactly why many people and myself think the evidence supports that Madeleine came to an accident while they were out drinking, while they neglected their child, all their children. Madeleine came to an accident, and when they discovered that, the question then was, what do we do? If we just report this, we call whatever their emergency is in Portugal, we might go down as in neglecting the children. They might take our kids away. We'll lose our careers. And we've got this fellow. I think he's a very shrewd, kind of cold-blooded. That's why I think of him. I'm not saying he didn't love his daughter. I'm not saying she didn't love her daughter. But when it came down to what are we going to do, I think the evidence supports more likely that they made a decision, or he made that decision, to save their butts. That it was too late for Madeleine, but it wasn't too late for their other children. It wasn't too late for their careers. If only it could be looked at as somebody else did this, not us, we might pull this off. And I'll have to say, congrats, Gerry. Congrats. So the behavior of the parents always showed they're more concerned about their own welfare than Madeleine's. The behavior of their friends always showed that they cared more for distancing themselves from the case rather than involving themselves in it. You would think there are friends who, Madeleine has been, quote, kidnapped. You'd think the friends would do everything they could to help these people find their kidnapped child. Not so much. The behavior of the politicians always showed they were more interested in protecting their country more than providing assistance and cooperation. The behavior of the police, not the original Portuguese police, but what happened later on with the UK and Germany and all that stuff, were more interested in serving the people in power rather than the ideals of justice and public safety. The behavior of the media always showed they were more interested in ratings and earnings rather than presenting the facts and illuminating the truth. And that's just an ongoing problem with the media. They could care less about the truth. So here we are today. Sorry, Kate and Gerry. Now we have a full circle. Before it was the UK and Germany, and now Portugal has completed the circle. The circle is around Christian Brueckner. This is what's going to happen, in my opinion. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. Christian Brueckner. I don't think they have the evidence on Christian Brueckner because time keeps going by, and they have nothing. They don't have the body of Madeleine McCann. They don't have DNA from Madeleine McCann. They don't have photos of Madeleine McCann in Christian Brueckner's house or whatever, burial, where he's buried crap in some shed. They don't have her clothing. They don't have anything except he was in the area. So what? He lived in the area. He's a creepo. He belongs where he belongs in a prison. I don't have a problem with that. But there's creepos in every area where a child goes missing. It doesn't mean every single creepo took that child or that any of those creepos took that child. So they got nothing. But I do think they have now the circle. The circle's complete. Portugal is not arguing anymore. Therefore, they may never take Christian Brueckner to court because they don't have evidence, but they may shut this case down with some kind of weird plea bargain that Christian Brueckner is going to go, whatever, I'm going to get off of this and I can be famous. Okay, once I can't get charged for the crime of, or can't go to prison for longer for Madeleine McCann or whatever, if I get some kind of deal, sure, I don't mind saying I did it. Sometimes these guys like the publicity. They can get a book written, you know what I mean? And or they will just say that they might just say, we know he did it. UK, Germany, and Portugal have all agreed that it's Christian Brueckner. Even if we can't bring him to justice, we can close this case down because we know full well, and all of us agree, that is Christian Brueckner. And that will put the whole thing to rest. The UK can stop spending money uselessly. The German prosecutor can go, oh, see, I was always right. And Portugal can finally just bury this case and not have to deal with it anymore. That's what I think is going to happen. The circle is complete. I hope I'm wrong because I'd like to see that if they're going to actually say Christian Brueckner did it, I'd like to see what they've got. Put him in court and let's see this evidence that you have. I don't think it's ever going to make it there. I don't. And I don't think this, since Madeleine's body's never been found, unless it gets found one day in a location where we know exactly who put her body there, the case will never be solved. So I've always said, I like things to come to a conclusion. I like justice to be done. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. And you have to accept that. And this has been a fascinating case because a massive, massive amount of money has been spent on this one missing child case where there's so many missing children in UK, in Portugal, in Germany, that the money could be spent on better. But because this has all been a big charade, in my opinion, that therefore, look at the what's happening and what's behind it all. And I say it's politics, and I say it's money. Politics and money. The media are about money, and the rest of it's about politics. And it's sad. Well, let's see. We'll see where this all ends up when it comes to 2024, because nothing's going to happen before then. But here we have the news of the day. Yes. Sorry, Kate and Gerry. Anyway, thank you for being here. If you haven't been here before, please do subscribe to the channel, like this video, and check out the links below. See you next time.